Hi, I'm Greg.
And I'm Leanne,
Welcome to Empowered Now.
where we save humanity
One relationship at a time.
We all struggle from time to time connecting with and understanding others and ourselves.
So we hope to encourage you to live a more authentic and empowered life by sharing what we've learned as coaches and as individuals.
Empowered Now is LGBTQ2IA, alternative lifestyle, poly, and kink friendly.
Thanks for joining us
And enjoy the show.
Welcome to episode 13, Being a Compassionate Partner. This episode, we're going to talk about why it's important to be a compassionate partner and our experiences with it. So I guess first thing that'll come up for me, and I'll ask you this question, honey, is what does it mean to be a compassionate partner to you?
Right. Well, I think it's more important what it's not, because we kind of sometimes need the definition to be about what it isn't first, so that we can kind of create our own definition of what compassion looks like for us. So for me, what it's not is disregarding your own boundaries. It is not about taking on your partner's struggle as your own. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of get confused, those two areas. And then what was the last one that I wanted to say? Oh, and you know, as a compassionate partner, you never have any reason to do anything that you find unethical or participate in or be party to.
Okay,
So,
can you explain that last one a little bit?
yeah. So say, for example, you're married to a partner who is deciding to expand their horizons financially. And in order to do that, they've decided to, I don't know, deal in illegal drugs. And you're married to this person. As a compassionate partner, you have no obligation to stay in that marriage. You have no obligation to participate in those activities. Compassion doesn't mean, oh, well, I can see that there's a struggle here and you need to do something and it's unethical. And therefore, I will still support you because I'm being compassionate to your circumstances.
Right. So you're not a milquetoast, in other words. You're not like, I'm going to do everything no matter what because I'm a compassionate human being, right?
Yeah.
Your boundaries aren't so porous that you can allow yourself to be walked all over.
Exactly. Yes.
So that would be being compassionate to yourself, honoring your
Hey,
truth, right?
truly. Yes.
Right. Taking personal responsibility for who you are and what matters to you, right?
Yes, correct. I like that.
Right. And I guess further to that too, one of the things that comes up for me when I think about compassionate partner is that personal responsibility piece.
Mhm.
I know we talk a lot about it. And the reason I think we talk a lot about it is because I think we both hold it to be one of sort of the tenets of our life, really, and
Yeah.
our relationship, certainly, and the work that we do, right? And, personal responsibility looks like, okay, I'm going to take ownership of my shit.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to take ownership of your shit, but I'm also going to do what I need to do or what I'm able to do to create safe spaces for both of us to be able to connect and interact in a way that feels comforting and feels connected
And loving.
and loving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, kind, loving, compassionate. Yeah, the whole nine yards. So I
Mhm.
think it's pretty foundational to what I consider to be a healthy relationship. One of the other things that comes up for me too about compassionate partners is it doesn't necessarily mean that you always have to agree,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can disagree on things and still be partners. Like, you're using the illegal drugs as an example, but we can use other things as an example, right? You don't eat meat. We can
Right.
disagree on that, right? And so how can I be a compassionate partner? Well, I choose not to eat meat when you're around, or I choose not to eat meat I choose not to cook it in the house, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So if I want to have a steak, I go somewhere else and have a steak,
Right.
right? To me, that's compromise. That's being a compassionate partner because I know you don't like the smell of meat being cooked in the house, right?
I don't. I really don't. You're
I know you
right.
don't.
That's
I don't.
correct.
I honestly don't know why, because it smells fucking delicious. But I get it. Each their own. But the point being that it's not really about me at that point. It becomes about what can I do to create. And I won't say a safe space here because it's not like you're you're in danger of anything,
Mhm.
but to still be understanding and empathetic and so on, right?
I think that's part of a safe space, really. If I feel like my partner can't uh, accommodate some of my, needs, wants, and desires, then what are we, what are we doing?
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I suppose there's compromise in terms of there might be some things that I have to live with, right? That's cool. But there are also things that maybe we can agree to change. And that's where agreements come in, and holding that compassion for yourself,
Hmm.
creating your own boundaries around things that matter to you.
Right.
For example, in that case, I don't like to eat meat other than fish. And, even fish I kind of struggle with sometimes, but I do it primarily because of the diet that we're on and it's easier. But if I were to give up meat again entirely, um, or even when we're talking about different kinds of meat, I could say, hey, you want to cook meat? I will go elsewhere.
Right.
Go
Yeah, it
ahead,
works
have
both
your
ways.
steak. I'll be outside for dinner, or I'll be heading to the library. Things are
Right.
opening up now, so there's choices.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Or I'll be cooking steak, while you're out on a date or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
exactly. And this isn't about necessarily any relationship structure in particular. It
No.
applies to all relationships,
Hmm.
even collegial or familial or platonic relationships. They're all about, like we were talking about earlier, connection. And when we want to connect, when we want to relate to somebody, part of that requires thinking about where they're coming from. What are their circumstances? What are their safety needs? What are
Hmm.
their emotional needs? Um, some of them we can't cater to. And in that case, we discuss, we agree, we disagree, we find ways to work around it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned a few of these, but what do you think are some of the necessary components of being a compassionate partner?
Um, right. Well, I just kind of ran through a few: emotional needs, safety needs, the circumstances of their life, their reality. One of the things that came up for us when we were talking with Jessica Fern was talking about, okay, I ask somebody out to meet me somewhere at 10 o'clock at night, and they live in an area that's a bit rougher, maybe, or they themselves, because of how they present in the world, are subject to potential street harassment or bullying, or right. And I'm saying to my
Hmm.
friend or my partner or my lover or whoever, hey, meet me at this place at 10 o'clock at night. For me, it's not a big deal because I have transportation to get there. They have to take public transportation.
Right.
They don't necessarily feel comfortable doing that. And if I'm a compassionate partner and I'm aware of those circumstances, maybe I offer to pick them up, or maybe I
Hmm.
make the date earlier so it's not dark out, or
Right.
those kinds of things, right? Um, so circumstances of their lives are important considerations, and also their wants and desires. Like, sometimes we base this really solely on needs. Do you need that? Do you need that? Do you need that? And then sure, I'll acquiesce. I'll give in on that one. You know?
Hmm.
But what about the things that aren't needs, that are just wants, that are just I don't need this to stay in the relationship necessarily, but I really would like it,
Hmm.
right?
Right. Right.
So, uh communication, I think, is best done prior to making any decisions that will impact your partner.
How,
So,
how does that look? What do you mean?
yeah, well, um, recent examples would be things like communicating before you have sexual activity with another partner, if our agreement has been that you aren't interested in that and don't want to do that, and then you change your mind, right? Have the conversation. Don't be afraid to have the difficult conversation. Step into that space, show up for your person, say, hey, I'm having these feelings for someone else, and I want to talk to you about what are your boundaries? What agreements do we need, if any? What are my boundaries?
Okay.
Right?
So then what if I say, well, I don't have any boundaries really. Do what you want to do.
Great. But you've had the conversation. It's about respecting the idea that there could be boundaries.
Right. So it's about opening it up and creating a space where people can express those.
Yeah.
As opposed
Have
to
the opportunity, right? The opportunity
right,
to
exactly.
just say, oh, I do have some boundaries actually.
Okay. So then the other thing to that too, to add, is that understanding that boundaries especially are organic. They change as we
Yes.
change, right? So the other thing to consider there is that willingness to step into that conversation at any point. So I might say to you today, no, go do what you want to do. It's fine. I'm good, But then a week or two from now, I might say, hey, look, there's something coming up for me here that I want to talk about and unpack with you. And, or, whatever your language is around something like that. But so
that's how you'd say it to me.
Yeah, it's totally how I'd say it to you. It's totally how I'd say it to you.
You would.
For me, knowing that is okay to do, that's a safe thing to do, that feels compassionate, right? Another thing too, as far as the communication, checking in with and these are all poly related, checking in with your partner before you talk or ask for advice about another partner. Right. So, hey, are you comfortable? Are you open to having this conversation? Right. So I'm struggling with this and I'm wanting some insight or some input from you. Are you open to that? Or maybe the agreement is that we don't talk about other partners at all. Or maybe that's an agreement that you have with another partner. It can get, I don't know, maybe it can get challenging sometimes, but I think that's part of the process of opening up and recognizing that these things need to be discussed and talked about.
Well, let's put it in a monogamous perspective for a minute.
Sure.
We lived that life together.
Yeah, we did.
So there's loads of opportunities where that same situation can come up. I want to take you to a concert. You can't go for whatever reason. You're sick or you don't have the money or you have another commitment. I only have tickets for that night. So I decide to take someone else. Right? I would let you know that I'm going to go to the concert and I may or may not share with you who I'm going with. In a marital situation or a nesting partner situation or a primary partner situation, you probably would share who you're going with. But if you have that limited information agreement with one of your friends or partners or colleagues, right, where it's really not discussed on a regular basis, and it's not an expectation or an agreement, you don't need to share that information. You can just go to the concert with whoever you want.
Right. And I think further to that point too, you mentioned friends, right? So platonic relationships, right? And we don't always sit down and negotiate agreements with our friends. It's not really, maybe it feels a bit overkillish to me.
Well, a lot of them are implied.
It's not as big a deal, I think, with platonic relationships, unless, and this gets into the next piece of this, there's some level of expectation, whether it be unspoken or not. So that's where I think if you're like, hey man, I really want to go with you to this show. Right. And so
because it's a special connection you have with the artist or as a,
birthday present, whatever, I know that this is really important to you. These guys fucking rock. You want to see them, so I want to go with you to this show. I want to take you to this show. And then you say, well, I can't go. Oh, okay. Well, then guess what? I'm going to find somebody else to go because I already got 2 tickets and I paid for them. Right. And so, but if the expectation from the person that you were, offering to take is that, well, I thought you would just, sell the ticket
Not,
and not go,
not
right?
go.
Right? Well, that becomes an unmet expectation. That becomes an uncommunicated expectation at that
Well,
point.
and an unreasonable one, really.
Yeah, unreasonable as well, for sure. But still, the expectation. So, how can you be a compassionate partner in that situation?
Yeah. So you mentioned creating safe spaces, right?
Mhm.
I think a lot of the time, what we shy away from when we're trying to relate with somebody and be in that space of compassion with them is we don't want to disappoint, we don't want to hurt, we don't want to disrupt, we don't, and so we're kind of a little too careful and afraid to have the conversation that's necessary around expectations.
Mhm.
We often hear that expectations are the root of disappointment or the seed of disappointment. And that's pretty much always the case. When we feel disappointment in a partner, it's often because we expected something different from them and they didn't deliver. But did we communicate what we needed from them clearly?
Right.
Were we clear? And unexpressed expectations certainly will lead to more disappointment. So, when we were talking about this episode, we were talking about a situation that came up for someone in one of the support groups. So, someone asked their partner to spend some time with them and hang out and help them with something. That person decided to take 30 minutes and go and have a phone call. And in this case, it was with another partner, but in a monogamous situation, it could be with anybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in that 30 minutes, they felt abandoned, disappointment. They felt resentment toward their partner because they had said, I want you to show up and spend the time with me doing this thing. However, what they didn't say was, spending the time also includes, I really need the help. I can't do this on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that partner assumed that, hey, 30 minutes isn't a big deal. Maybe they didn't know that there was a deadline. Maybe they didn't realize that you couldn't do it on your own. Maybe they didn't realize how important their participation was.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if we say, hey, I've got this project, I can't do it by myself. I thought you would be a great person to help me with it. I have a deadline. So, if we spend these 2 hours together, that would be amazing. And I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah.
That's pretty easy to say.
Yeah. I mean, that seems reasonable.
And if they're not able to deliver at that point, they're not able to step into that space and be there for you and be present and show up as someone that you can rely on, then you got some decisions to make.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right. Exactly. And I think it's also important to note in those kinds of situations that, shit comes up, emergencies happen.
Sure. Oh,
So,
God.
So maybe if that does happen in that situation and the person's on the phone for a half an hour with somebody else, you don't believe the stories that you're telling yourself. Get the facts after they've hung the phone up and say, okay, is everything all right? Is there anything you need to let me know? And make some decisions based upon the answers that you get there, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So making assumptions in those kinds of situations is definitely, it's certainly not the healthiest thing to do in that situation. The other thing that comes up for me too, in creating, say, in this compassionate partner piece, is knowing your own boundaries. Like, I think it's
Vital.
really, it's vital. It's really, really important to understand and know your boundaries. And that doesn't mean that you have to know all your boundaries, because boundaries can come up through experiences, right? So something that you didn't think was a boundary yesterday could become a boundary today, right?
Right.
Or you don't
I can think of a handful of places where that's happened.
Exactly. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, right? So, if something is happening, in the moment and you're like, oh, fuck, okay, well, this feels weird to me, and you need to unpack it and figure it out. Okay, guess what? There's a boundary here. There's a boundary here that I wasn't aware of. So
Yes.
being able to communicate those boundaries in a healthy, productive and connected way, compassionate way, is really important. Not only the ones that you already understand and know, but the ones that come up as situations arise and different things happen.
Yes, this is really an important piece here, because we had a conversation with another coach yesterday about consent. And you were both talking about enthusiastic consent being imperative, right?
Yep.
And I brought up the point that sometimes my consent isn't enthusiastic, but it's exploratory, it's experimental. I don't know.
Right.
Like you said, I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
So I can say yes to something that I'm unsure of, and then discover that is a boundary. Didn't want to do that. Don't like that. Right. And I think that's really important to kind of throw in here, because we can, as compassionate people, say, oh, well, but you consented and now you're changing your mind, and that's a problem for me. I feel somehow that's not fair. Right. But we're trying.
Sorry, let me back up. So the
Yep.
person that you're doing the activity with says to you, well, you consented and now you're rescinding that. I guess ultimately what comes up for me, and I actually didn't say this yesterday when we were in the call, but what comes up for me right now, talking about compassionate partners, is the second that you say no, is the second that consent it stops, it's done, it's over. And it doesn't matter why, it doesn't, and then, so it doesn't matter if we're, driving race cars, or listening to a record, or going to a restaurant, like the second somebody says no, I'm no longer in this.
Yes.
Well, then it stops, right? So that's how that enthusiastic consent plays into it, right? So if you step into it with enthusiasm and curiosity and wonder, and you're like, I don't really know if I'm going to dig this or not, but I know that I'm willing to try enthusiastically, right? And
or even hesitantly. The thing is I do a lot of my decision making in that kind of space of, I really might be hesitant about something and do it anyway, because part of it is overcoming the fear. Part of it is challenging myself, putting myself into uncomfortable spaces on purpose for growth. All of those things are true for me. And I won't necessarily come across as enthusiastic.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I get that. And after yesterday, I think I understand what you mean. And I support that. And I definitely, that aligns with me, because there's been situations that I've been in where I wasn't particularly enthusiastic about doing something, but I ended up doing it anyway. And turns out I really fucking love it. So, or sometimes I really fucking hated it, but at least now I know, right?
Exactly.
Going forward. And there's also been the other thing too that comes to mind from you around that. I know that's not the topic, but I think it relates to the compassionate partner piece, because there are things that I've done with other people that I hated, but that I've done with somebody else and I've loved it.
Right.
So it's not just the thing that you're doing, it's also the person or the energy or the chemistry that you have with the person that you're doing it with. Right? So I think that's important as well. And so how does that relate to the compassionate partner piece? Well, it's because you're connecting with somebody in a way that feels energetically good to you, right? And so you're able to step into things that you might have had a bad experience or an uncomfortable or a damaging experience with something before, but it's something that person really wants to try. So you're like, well, okay, you've been kind, you've been understanding, you've been patient, so maybe I will step into this with you. And
I feel safe.
I feel safe, exactly. So it turns out, as a compassionate partner, you've created a safe space for somebody to try something that they might not have tried with other people again.
That is terrific. Yes.
Right.
I love that.
But if you're just like, I didn't like that with that person and I'm never going to do it again, that's fine too. Don't get me wrong. That's totally fine. I know that I don't like pickles and I'm not going to ever eat pickles again. I don't need to eat another pickle with you to know that I don't like fucking pickles. I don't like eating them either, for that matter. But anyway, So I don't like pickles, so I don't need to try them again. But there are things that you and I have eaten together and tried together and done together that I wasn't necessarily enthusiastic about, but I'm like, yeah, I kind of dig this. And
Yeah.
some of those things have been things that I've done with other people before. And it's like, yeah, this is way more fun with you. So yeah, for sure.
It happens, right?
Yeah, totally.
One of the other things is that honoring your own boundaries can be a way of supporting your partner compassionately,
Hmm.
so that you're not in a place, in a space where you feel your values are being challenged or compromised. That just builds resentment in a relationship. So, say for example, you have a friend or a partner who drinks heavily, and you have a boundary around being around people who are drunk. Makes you uncomfortable. You don't do it. Maybe you've got some trauma, who knows? I do. So that boundary, honoring that boundary, can be a way to show up for that partner. If they are drunk and you're in the presence of something that's uncomfortable that they're doing, you can say, this is my boundary. I'm going to step away from this. Have a good night.
Hmm.
Right?
Yep.
Instead of sitting there and being miserable, judgmental, critical. Yeah.
Hmm.
Now, if that behavior is unhealthy, that's a whole other discussion. But people do get drunk in ways that I'm not comfortable being around. And so when I see that happening around me, I have a decision to make. How uncomfortable am I? Do I feel safe? Do I feel like my boundary or my values are being compromised? And if so, I have agency to step away from that. Let me just go do something else. I'll go home and have a nice bath,
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good. I like that.
Yeah. So it's a way of not sort of, I think the habitual place that people can get into is in a punishing place. You did the thing that I don't like, and I had to watch it.
Hmm.
No, you didn't.
No, you
Were you
didn't.
strapped to a chair?
Well,
You
but
know?
having said that, I think it's important to point out that there are people out there that might be listening that might find themselves in very uncomfortable and potentially harmful situations around something like this. So it's important to understand that if you are with somebody who is abusive or damaging or
Mhm.
hurtful in some way, and it's not safe for you to advocate for those
Don't
boundaries,
advocate.
don't advocate. Make a
Create a
plan.
safe exit strategy
Exactly.
with a shelter or a social worker. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're not suggesting that this is a blanket sort of carte blanche situation where you just advocate and we'd never want anybody to put themselves in harm's way because of it, for sure.
No, thank you.
Especially when it comes to alcohol, right? And
Thank
abusive
you.
situations and stuff. So
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Good point. You know, a lot of the things that we hear, and I wrote a little bit about this on my blog, is your feelings are your feelings. They're not my responsibility. And we've talked about this, unpacked it a little bit in other podcasts, but it comes into the being the compassionate partner piece when you recognize the personal responsibility that you brought up, right?
mhm.
The relationship is an interaction, right? It's
it's an it's
not,
an it's an entity in and of itself.
yeah, it's not a one-way street. It's not up to one person to do all of the compromising, um, or to do all of the work. And if we are in a relationship with somebody and we care about them, we will find ways to help the relationship flourish, nurture it, rather than challenge it all the time,
Right.
you know?
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I actually could kind of find it a little triggering for me for some reason
Ooh.
when that comes up, because it feels I, the word that comes to mind is it feels incredibly selfish. And some of the situations that I've heard about, some of the situations that I've been in personally, both as somebody who's done it and as somebody who's been on the receiving end of it, it always felt selfish to me. And I
To
get
do what?
well, to be presented with, so I mean, what's an example? I'm trying to think of an example. So to be presented with something that I did or said that created and I don't want to say made somebody feel a certain way, because I don't believe in that, but that brought up feelings in somebody else that were triggering, right? Or that were potentially hurtful or damaging, right?
Yeah.
And so I did that thing, and then they brought it to me, and then I said, well, that's yours, not mine. So I'm just going to keep doing that thing, and you're just going to have to deal with it or leave. Right. And so that feels really selfish to me. And I get that there are people out there that do that. And I hear you. Yeah, I hear you.
And there may be circumstances where that's necessary to do.
For sure. But when it comes to things that aren't necessary to do that, if you're just doing it because you want to stand on your principles and you don't need to do it, then in my opinion, you're just being a jerk. I mean, really, like if there's a reason that you're doing something.
So we should just call this episode "How Not to Be a Jerk."
Yeah. How not to be an asshole, really, is what it is. But yeah, no, I think if you're doing the thing that's continuing to trigger somebody, then really investigate, is the thing that I'm doing really that important to me? What's more important, the thing that I'm doing or the connection or the person? Right. And then if you decide, hey, wait, the thing I'm doing is more important, well, then disconnect. Because you're not really, in my opinion, if you're continuing to do the thing that's triggering the person, and like I said, I've been on both ends of this. I've been the triggerer and I've been the triggeree. Right? And so,
well, and we should also put a caveat in there about trigger being sort of the heightened language that a lot of people use in clinical settings.
Yeah.
So there's the clinical trigger where you really are dysregulated and can't manage. And then there's the sort of regular everyday use of the word that we're utilizing here, which is I'm upset.
Am I using that?
I don't know.
I don't think so. I think I'm using that if I did something and you, for instance, if I did something and you said, I'm upset, I would have a different reaction than if you said, you know what, that really triggered me.
And so you should, right? Like they're two different kinds of responses.
Right. So I think what I'm talking about is that really triggering thing. Being upset isn't necessarily a bad thing, in my opinion. Being uncomfortable isn't necessarily a bad thing. It depends on the level of the uncomfort and the ability of somebody to be able to regulate that discomfort.
Yes.
Right. And if you know that you're doing something that's continually putting that person in a state of dysregulation, I want to make my language clear here. If what you are doing, if the person's reacting to what you are doing in a continually dysregulated state, right? And you're not willing to find out, number one, why. Number two, if you're not willing to negotiate around that and make an agreement to either change the behavior or help your partner through it, then why are you in the relationship? And I know that this is a very controversial issue, especially in the poly community. But I don't think I really care.
Yeah.
I think that's what I would want to do for my partners. And it's not to take responsibility off of the person who's being triggered or who's dysregulated or who's having heightened emotions around something, because it's just as much their responsibility to do the work, right? So it's not about responsibility. It's not about that. What it is about connection. And if what you're doing is causing a constant state of disconnection with somebody, then why are you still in a relationship? And that goes for both people.
Well, I think the responsibility piece is about being personally responsible to yourself as someone who is navigating relationships. You hold as much responsibility for the relationship flourishing or not flourishing, usually, as your partner. And this isn't about, it isn't about taking responsibility for them.
Mm-hmm.
It's about taking responsibility for yourself and saying,
Right.
oh, I'm hurting someone on the regular. What can I be doing differently with my time?
And what you could
How
be doing
can I
differently.
nurture this relationship if I want it to flourish?
Right. Or what you could be, the answer to that question is that that maybe I'm not in this relationship.
Yeah.
And that answer could be for either party. That
Mhm.
person taking responsibility for, their reaction to a situation could
Yes.
say, hey, wait a minute, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want you to change, because obviously that's really important to you.
Yes.
So
Or my needs are being regularly unmet and you're not able to meet them for whatever reasons. Like
right.
those
So
are
there's a
fine.
fundamental misalignment, right?
Yeah.
And so, okay, great. So I'm going to step away from the relationship, right? And I know it's not always cut and dry, and I know that there are feelings involved, and I understand all of that. It's not easy to do. It's really fucking hard to do in a lot of cases.
It's really
So-
fucking hard to do, even if you're the person making the decision to leave the connection.
Mhm.
And a lot of the time we forget that. It's like, oh, well, you're the one who broke up with them. Aren't you relieved? No, I feel like shit because it didn't work out and I really was hoping that it would,
Right. Exactly.
It's still very real to you, the
Exactly.
loss.
Right.
Yeah.
You're grieving the potential of what you hoped would be. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So for sure. Yeah, I think it's really important. So, I mean, even as we sit here discussing this from a sort of almost clinical standpoint, I want it to be clear to the people listening and watching that this isn't easy shit. Like, this is not stuff that you wake up one day and go, oh shit, I have a boundary around this and my partner isn't willing to do that, so I am going to disconnect from this relationship.
Yeah.
It's not that way. I mean, I've been in situations personally where it's taken months, years sometimes to realize these things, and to realize that you're just not able to align. And
Well, yeah, there's so many reasons why we do that, right? Well, we stay in a place where we don't feel we're receiving compassion.
right.
And I mean, it doesn't have to be even at the level of abusive relationships. It could be very kind of, regular everyday kind of things that are happening where you bring up something that you want or need and it's disregarded. You have a boundary and it's, disregarded. It's
Right.
like,
The
what
other,
boundary? I don't know.
the other thing too is what comes to mind to me too is relationships stagnate, right? They get boring, right? And so
What?
that's part of being
Shut up.
being compassionate with yourself. That's part of being compassionate with yourself, is like, this is boring the shit out of me. How do I fix it? What do I need to do with myself in order to be able to show up in this relationship? Because ultimately, that's really the only thing that you can do here. You can't control other people's behaviors. You can't, all you can do is make requests. All you can do is advocate for your boundaries and your needs and wants, et cetera, and then hope that things will work out in a way that suits you and is in alignment with your values, right? So if you're in that situation where the relationship is stagnant, or you're bored or whatever, get curious. What do you need? What do you want? And are you willing to put those needs and wants out on the table and advocate for them? Right?
And do you feel safe doing that?
And do you feel safe doing that? Right? We talked a lot about what other people, what you can do for a partner to feel safe and to be a compassionate partner. But what are you doing to be a compassionate partner to yourself? Right? And that's ultimately, not ultimately, that's a big component of this, is investigating it and getting curious about what matters to you. And if you identify that, hey, this thing that I'm doing really, really fucking matters to me, even though it's obvious that it's creating uncomfortable and hurtful feelings in my partner, well, what's more important?
And sometimes you choose the thing, right? You choose the activity or the way of life or the whatever.
Exactly.
Because it's more authentically you.
Exactly. And then on the flip side of that, like I said before, if the person that it's hurting continues to choose to be with you, even though they know that about you, well, then that responsibility is theirs.
And well, you can also still weigh that for yourself because, uh, boy, I have been the partner who has watched a person I care about suffer, not help themselves, not be open to help that was offered, or even support that I could give them. And so at some point I had to kind of wash my hands of the responsibility of being a compassionate partner there because I had done everything that I could and I had to step out of that relationship.
Right, but you took that responsibility and you were compassionate to yourself.
And it took a couple of years. Like, let's be honest, I was in therapy for 2 years with this person who I, cared about deeply, and it didn't work.
Right.
We couldn't change the behaviors. So
Right. But ultimately what it comes down to is that you decided to be compassionate to yourself. Right?
I decided to continue to live the way I wanted to live that aligned with my values and who I am.
And some would say that ultimately that was also being compassionate to your partner because it released them to be able to take advantage of opportunities should they decide to do that.
Yes, because if they're in a relationship with me and I am not in alignment with them, they're in a relationship that's not aligned. So they're stuck, right? Unless they make that choice for themselves to leave. I think it's funny because you and I together have had a few partners in our lives. We've both been married 3 times before, and this is our 4th marriage. And sometimes coming into this work as, relationship and sexuality coaches, we kind of bump up against maybe the idea of, well, you've had these failed relationships. What makes you so smart in this arena? I'll tell you what makes us so smart. It's a fuckload of experience of what not to do, watching other people, not be compassionate partners, watching ourselves do that, and recognizing when that's happening. Tons of work, tons of personal development work, tons of therapy, reflection, and self-awareness, right? That we bring to the table, each of us, and collectively. Whoo, damn.
Well, we live in a, right, exactly, right on. I completely agree with that. And we live in a society that values tenure.
Oh yeah.
How many relationships and do we know of personally that people have been together for 50 years or 30 years or 20 years and it's been just nightmarish?
The classic trope of ball and chain.
Yeah. And so it's almost as if they value longevity and tenure more than they value intimacy and love and compassion and kindness and all that stuff. And I'm not saying that those relationships are any less valuable at all. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that it just becomes a matter of what you value. And for me, my values align with, if I'm not happy with something and there's no way to work through that, and I have tried as many doors and as many opportunities and options as I see available, given the tools that I have, and it's still not going to work, then why the fuck am I still there? And so that has created 3 marriages. And people say, 3 failed marriages or 3. There's nothing of failure about it. Like they had their beautiful and amazing moments, and they were wonderful experiences, all 3 of them.
Agreed.
I have some beautiful memories about all 3 of them, and all of the other long-term relationships that I had that didn't end in matrimony. And so it's not that they're failures. It's just part of my journey. Right. And
thank you. Yes.
I've learned from those things. And I don't value longevity as something that means that I'm doing the right thing for me. I value vulnerability. I value love. And in that vulnerability, sometimes it means I have to take a look at what's going on around me and go, fuck, this isn't working for me. So I need to make some changes. And sometimes my partner needed to do that. and take a look at themselves and go, fuck, this isn't working for me. I need to make some changes. And one of those changes is I need to no longer be in this marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that's all about compassion. That's all about empathy and understanding and vulnerability and truly loving somebody. And
Yes.
and I can hear my voice getting passionate here. So it's obvious to me that this is really important to me. And I don't think I realized that until we just started talking about it.
I love it.
But it is important to me to recognize that, you know what? Yeah, I have had 3 marriages. I'm 4. And 3 of
Thank
them,
you.
yeah, in 3 of those instances, we decided to disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
And we decided to go our separate ways and have separate journeys. But for the time that we were together, we were creating experiences, some of them wonderful, some of them shitty, frankly. Like there's some really fucked up experiences in those relationships. There's also some really beautiful experiences in those relationships. And so so when people ask me that question about, well, what makes you a good relationship coach? Well, fuck, who else? Like I know
Right?
how to relationship.
I
I know
want,
what to call it.
yeah, I want someone who has been in a variety of different types of relationships giving me advice. Not somebody who has been in one type of relationship for 50 years. That's not going to be my person.
And that's not to say that for those people that are listening that statement doesn't resonate with. That's not to say that being married for 50 years is a bad thing. I don't think it is.
No,
I mean, my grandparents, they were married for 50 plus years.
my
And
parents.
yeah, and I'm sure that there were amazing and beautiful moments in those relationships. Like,
And things that I will never understand as
yeah,
someone whose longest relationship was 11 years.
right,
Right?
same, 10 for
Yeah,
me. Yeah. So I think, yeah, and I think that what we're saying here is it just doesn't resonate with us.
exactly.
What we want is we want to make it clear that this isn't a judgment. This is just a preference. This is a choice that we make.
Mhm.
And that choice has brought us a certain perspective that is different than that perspective of longevity and tenure. And
Mhm.
if that perspective resonates with you, great, hit us up. We'd be happy to talk with you.
Mhm.
Here's the shameless plug, right? Links in the click the link below, right? Or whatever.
And don't forget to subscribe.
And don't forget
Not
to
kidding.
subscribe. Not kidding. Yeah. But seriously, if those kinds of ideals and values resonate with you, not just because you're poly or C&M in some way, but maybe you're mono and you think similarly in this way. We would
Mhm.
love to have an opportunity to talk to you. The point though is that showing up as a compassionate partner in each of these relationships sometimes means that we have to disconnect.
Mhm.
Right? Sometimes that means that we have to step away from it because that's the best thing for the people involved and it's the
Mm.
best thing for the relationship.
Right. And sometimes that can be a temporary thing,
Mhm.
right? For example, if somebody has an addiction issue or a mental health issue that needs to be tended to and they need treatment and you can't be around that.
Mhm.
Maybe even being in a relationship is harmful to them. Being a compassionate partner is giving them the opportunity and the space required to do those things.
Right.
Or if they want to take a job opportunity that will take them halfway across the world and you're not interested in having a long distance relationship, you can step out of that connection for that time and then reinvestigate when they get back.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Or somebody wants to, fuck off for a month and go to Europe or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And, wants to backpack through, whatever. Right. And they want to be completely on their own and left alone. Okay, great. Well, go do that. But while you're gone, we're going to disconnect and I'm going to do me and you're going to do you. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's perfectly reasonable and acceptable thing to do. As long as those things are being advocated for and are transparent. Because as a compassionate partner, you don't want unethical behavior to creep up, right?
Absolutely. When I was in my first live-in relationship with a boyfriend, it was an abusive situation. He received therapy in which he learned the phrase, your feelings are your feelings and not my responsibility.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And he used it a lot to do whatever the hell he wanted. And I do see this quite a lot as we're working with individuals and on their relationships, the kind of carte blanche, I've got a blank check. I can do what I need to do, and it's up to you to manage your feelings, and I have nothing to do with that.
And if you don't like it, you can do what you want to do. You can leave. I don't care.
Well, or the expectation is that you'll remain in the relationship and deal.
Mm.
And the idea of that, it does not sit with me well. I'm not that person. I'm all for self-advocacy, like we were talking about. I'm all for really healthy boundaries. I'm all for negotiating agreements if you need to, and finding the common ground, and disagreeing when you need to disagree, and disentangle when you need to disentangle. But holy Hannah, I could not live like that. That's all I'm saying. I couldn't do it. It is not in alignment with my core values. Compassion is one of my core values. So therefore, it matters to me how my partner feels.
Would you say that there's some element of, I don't know, I'm just riffing on an idea here, and this is genuinely a curiosity. I don't think I've developed an opinion about it, but I'm just curious. Would you say that there's some element of gaslighting that happens in that situation?
Gaslighting is when you say it didn't happen that way.
Or you refuse to take responsibility for what you did in that situation.
Or I didn't do it.
Or I didn't do it.
Is what gaslighting is. Gaslighting comes from the movie Gaslight, in which a husband tried to convince his wife that she was insane so that he could put her away. And the idea of saying to somebody, I need to do this for me, and how you feel is up to you about it, but I'm going to do it anyway, isn't really the same thing as saying, I didn't do the thing that upset you, or it didn't happen that way. But what does come up in gaslighting is phrases like, you're overreacting.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right?
Or
any reaction is overreacting.
That's not the way it happened.
Yeah, or it's just invalidating somebody's feelings is a form of gaslighting. It's a sort of junior form, but yeah, it's on the list of things that people like narcissists might use to plant the seeds of doubt in someone's mind.
Right. Okay.
But I mean, it's possible that your partner's overreacting, but that's a judgment. That's through your lens. We are completely different human beings, and we cannot know how somebody's going to see or experience the same thing that we're experiencing.
Right.
And to think that we can is kind of ridiculous, really, when you think about it. So when you say to somebody you're overreacting, it's not really appropriate. You can say that about yourself. I recognize that this is an overreaction, and maybe I need to look at, hey, am I projecting something? Right? Like I'm using my past trauma and seeing you as that person instead of who you really are. That's different.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that comes up for me when we talk about this is, being that we identify as relationship autonomists, and for those that don't know what that means, it means that we have, as people who identify as poly, we came up with the term relationship autonomist because it means that each relationship that we have is autonomous in and of itself. It's a separate entity from the other relationships that we have. And so it has its own separate agreements, its own separate its own separate boundaries, and the people in it make the decisions about the relationship and nobody else. So, just like your monogamous marriage, nobody makes decisions but the two of you about your relationship and your marriage, right? Other people might influence it on some level, but ultimately one or the other of you is making that decision. So, things like veto power and, all couples privilege and all of that stuff, are gone or certainly significantly minimized in that situation. Having said that, though, one of the things that is kind of an internal struggle for me is autonomy as a whole represents being able to make decisions for myself that align with myself. And even if they impact somebody else in a negative or harmful way, I still need to make that decision for myself. And it's not always easy, like if you need to break up with somebody, or
Mhm.
if you need to do something that somebody's not comfortable with, it's going to put them in an uncomfortable situation, like the nude beach thing that I did, or that I do rather, living a clothes-free life. That's not something that you're particularly comfortable with, right?
No.
But as an autonomist, it's my body, so it's my choice as to what to do with it. It's my
Right.
relationship with myself, so it's my choice as to what to do with it. So the
Mhm.
one thing that I struggle with is that as a compassionate partner, I also frankly want to make you feel okay.
Yeah, but you're using that language that you don't like to use.
I know, right? That's the
You
struggle.
can't make me feel
I
anything.
know, right? I
But
want to. I
you
want you to.
can, yeah.
Yeah, but that's the struggle. And I think that's
Well,
where the work comes in, is why do I want to make you feel that way? And I think it's less to do with you and more to do with me.
it's totally self-centered.
Well, it completely is, because if I made you feel like it, being clothes free and going to new beaches with friends was okay, then it would take some of the weight and the pressure off for me.
Right, right. You
So
wouldn't
it's not
you
really about
wouldn't get
you.
to see my pouty face when you leave. Um,
Right. I mean, it's a cute pouty face, don't get me wrong, but still.
there are things that you do though that allow me to feel the compassion in that choice, right? And we've unpacked for a long time the autonomy piece. And when you're making decisions from that core value place, someone who loves you, cares about you, will support that, even if they disagree, like me. I don't disagree with clothes-free lifestyles. I just can't participate in it. I am a little bit suspicious of some people's motivations for it. I think it could be misconstrued by other parties, third parties. So I worry on those levels. There's anxiety that comes up around those things, but I don't fundamentally disagree with a clothes-free lifestyle. It makes me uncomfortable for those reasons I just stated, but that's my discomfort to deal with. And I've said that to you, and you've allowed me time to talk about it with you, to unpack those feelings, to say these are the reasons why I'm concerned or worried or feeling left out, even. And you sat there without judgment. You haven't said to me, you're overreacting, or this isn't a big deal. Why are you making a big deal? Which would have invalidated my feelings, and I wouldn't feel safe sharing with you authentically. And so, therefore, you have shown up for me as a compassionate partner and shown up for yourself in a compassionate way by holding true to your values, making boundaries and agreements with me, or having boundaries and making agreements with me, and creating the safe space for me. So thank you is what I'm saying. That matters to me. And it
Thank you very
matters
much.
to me that you don't disregard your own values, right? I don't want that for you, even if it makes me uncomfortable. That's what love is.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So there's a lot of healthy communication that we've had around that. And while you want to make me okay with all of those things that I struggle with,
Mm-hmm.
it's not possible.
Right. Yeah.
It's just an unrealistic expectation of yourself.
Right. And it's trauma informed for sure. It's abandonment wound. Absolutely. It's fear that you're going to leave me because of it, et cetera, et cetera.
I'm not going to leave you for any reason. You heard it here first, folks.
I've got it on tape. Yeah. So I mean, it's there's certainly a lot to unpack in that, but it's interesting how that comes up for me when I talk about compassionate partner and then relationship autonomy. And there are times in my own energy where I feel conflicted about those two things.
Mm-hmm.
And there were times in my life, frankly, where I wasn't autonomous and I wasn't compassionate. and I was miserable. I guess further to that too, when we talk about stepping into autonomy, right? And we talk about stepping into our truth and into our core values, something like the whole, using the clothes-free life and stuff as an example, that wasn't an easy thing for me to admit. That wasn't an easy thing for me to bring up to you. It wasn't like I just, I said, hey, look, just on a Saturday afternoon as we're having, lunch and, oh yeah, look at the weather. And oh yeah, by the way, I'm clothes free, like it didn't happen that way. Or I want to go start hanging out at nude beaches. Oh, and I also want to do an article about it too, So it's like, it's not casual by any means. And it takes a lot of, I guess what I'm trying to say is it takes a lot of strength and courage for us to advocate for our needs and for our boundaries in those situations on both sides of that fence, right? On not fence, that's the wrong word. On both sides of the connection. You standing in your, because I'm sure maybe there was a part of you that wanted to just be, oh yeah, fuck yeah, that sounds like an amazing idea. I wish you all the love in the world, and I support it 1,000,000%. And I see absolutely no way this could backfire. It's going to be great and brilliant and wonderful and loving and right. You wanted to have all sorts of fucking wonderfulness around it.
Yes.
But I'm sure there was a part of you that wanted that, right?
Yeah. And I wanted, maybe part of me wanted to present that way, but my work is all about authenticity. So how can I walk the talk if I am not being authentic and real with my feelings in our connection,
right,
and with myself?
And so some people listening to this or watching this might say, well, how the fuck does that relate to compassion? Well, authenticity, vulnerability, those are all parts of being compassionate.
Yeah.
You can't show up in a compassionate way if you're not willing to be vulnerable, if you're not willing to be courageous and take the risk necessary to advocate for what you need, and take the risk of listening to your partner advocate for what they need, even if it makes you feel uncomfortable, even if it brings up stuff for you that you're not really truly willing to look at or take a, whatever. There's a lot of fucking bravery and courage in that stuff, and that's ultimately the foundation of a compassionate partnership in my mind.
Yeah. And isn't it also the core of authentic intimacy?
Yeah.
Emotional intimacy.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think 100%. It's all interconnected. Compassionate partner, emotional intimacy, vulnerability, courage, all of that stuff. It's all. And to those out there that might be more on the relationship anarchy side and might say to themselves, well, how does this relate to me? Well, I admire the fuck out of you for the courage that it takes to be able to stand in your truth and say, this is who I am, and I'm not going to compromise for anyone. It might not align with me, and that might not be something that I want in a relationship, but I do admire the courage that it takes to be able to step into that. And I do admire the courage that it takes to be able to express that, knowing full well that there are going to be situations where connections might not work out because of it.
Well, and let's just quickly define or sort of explain what relationship anarchy is. It's a philosophy that applies to all relationships. It's not just about romantic partnership, in which every single relationship is not determined or defined by norms, labels, the escalator, the idea of, we meet, we date, we live together, we get engaged, we marry, we have children, all that stuff in a relationship. They really work at sort of disrupting the beliefs around that. And even in like parent-child relationships, they do not ascribe to patterns and norms that are kind of upheld by the majority of society. They look at it as an independent relationship. Every relationship is independent. And in some ways, it does align with our relationship autonomous theory, which is essentially that each one is valuable on its own, has its own merit and worth, and is not above another. Right? And so, yeah, it's a non-hierarchical, if you're familiar with those terms. The idea is a broader spectrum than just the romantic relationships, right? And
Right.
I think it is for us too. I think our relationship autonomous theory applies to all kinds of relationships in our lives, and not kind of stepping not stepping into the power dynamic of, hey, this has to be a certain way,
Right. And in
right?
fact, it actually the term when we were talking about it and thinking about it,
Yeah.
um, when I came up with the idea of using relationship autonomy, it was because I wanted autonomy over my body.
Yes.
I wanted autonomy over who I see and when and how and all of that stuff, right?
And
That's
also about the nudity and,
right.
being clothes
Exactly.
free, and yeah.
Exactly. So I wanted that autonomy and I needed it. That I recognized that was a core need of mine that I
Yeah.
needed in my life in order to be in alignment with my values of vulnerability and love,
Mhm.
right? And so that's kind of where it spurred. So it really spurred out of this idea of the relationship with self,
Mhm.
right? And so I fundamentally I understand that, and I agree with the fact that no one relationship is, I agree with the fact of stepping out and disrupting the idea of one relationship being more important or special or valuable than another relationship, right? And I
Mhm.
also recognize I have a fuck ton of work to do in that regard.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
yeah.
yeah, but at the same time, I also, well, guess what I'm saying is that I have mad respect for those people that are willing to be courageous and step into that kind of connection, because it might often mean that they don't end up connecting with people because of it, right? And that's
Because
in
it
and of itself.
narrows the pool in terms of who's willing
Yeah,
to be involved. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. I
So
think that's fair. So I think in summary, we should just probably wrap this up, right?
yeah, sure.
What what we've come to is basically the compassionate partner, is about creating safe spaces for the people in their lives, having the difficult conversations, having their own boundaries made clear and honoring them, um, and taking into consideration their partner's needs, wants, desires, and circumstances, right?
Hmm.
When
Right,
making
exactly.
decisions. Having those difficult conversations prior to making decisions, I think, is a respectful thing for me personally.
Hmm.
And I want to be in a relationship with somebody who does that. I
Hmm.
don't want to be in a relationship with somebody who tells me after the fact, oh,
Hmm.
by the way, I did this thing that you're probably not going to be okay with. Um, because
Hmm.
if you know it's probably going to be a discussion of some sort, have the talk, you know
Hmm. For
that's
sure.
that's all I suggest. And that it's not about taking on somebody's struggles as your own. It's not about caretaking them. It's not about doing something that you believe to be unethical or harmful. And it's not about disregarding your own boundaries,
Absolutely right.
right?
And I also want to mention too about expectations.
Hmm.
It's important that if you do have expectations that you communicate them.
Yeah. And, knowing that expectations are problematic in and of themselves,
Yeah.
but that very rarely do we go through life relating to others without having some. So
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. I think that's a whole other
that's a
episode
whole other podcast.
for sure. Hey, write that down.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I will.
Yeah. So, and then the other one is the personal responsibility piece, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And personal responsibility doesn't mean that you're responsible for how other people feel. It means that you're responsible for how you feel and how you show up and your presence in a relationship and what you can do to create safe spaces, right?
And be in
That's
alignment with your core
and
values.
and be in alignment with your core values, right? And
Right. And
ultimately, I think that's what it comes down to is that if you've identified your core values, if you haven't,
Mhm.
hit us up, we'll help you with that. If you have identified your core values and you're doing things that aren't in alignment with those core values,
Right.
then that's the time to investigate and get curious and go, okay, am I holding myself accountable here? Am I being responsible to myself? Is this personal responsibility? And if the answer is no, then you adjust your behavior accordingly.
Hmm.
And so
True.
ultimately, maybe that's, I mean, there's no one thing that this comes down to, but I think that's a very important piece to this puzzle.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right.
All right. Well, just a reminder to everybody, keep it kind.
And choose love.
We'd love to hear your comments, questions, or topic suggestions. And remember to subscribe.
And you're invited to join our Facebook group, Empowered Now Relationship Support and Advice for All.
You can reach out to us on our websites at gregmillion.com
And leannemillion.com.
or follow us on Instagram at gregmillion.lifecoach.
And at Leanne Million.